Welcome.
So, I'm Graham.
I'm Ashkahn.
Today's question is, what info in starting a float tank center varies from country to country?
Okay.
Well, we've only ever opened up Float On in one country.
Yeah.
But
And we've talked to people in other countries, but
Yeah, and float center owners in other countries, too.
yeah, that's true. I wasn't thinking about that. But yeah. So yeah, I guess we'll take a stab at answering this, but I'm not sure.
It is our job
I guess
to
so.
answer your questions.
Yeah, maybe you should look more into this after you listen to us, though. Don't just bank everything you're hearing on this.
Well, first of all, in a lot of places, the language is going to be different. And the currency.
Yeah, I mean the geography.
Access to different materials can differ a little bit from place to place.
Yeah,
So
and
for the-
even here in the U.S., like what materials you're allowed to use can be different sometimes.
Yeah,
Like you
very
can't
true.
use oil paint in California.
Because they're afraid of fires and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I don't know
And
why.
other states are like, yeah, no problem. Go ahead and
Yeah,
use that."
Oregon is like, we're basically one giant ball of water. That's, yeah.
So yeah, in California, people usually use epoxy paint instead of oil paint.
So not international, but still, still relevant.
Working our way down. Go to Mexico from there.
Of course, just again, geographically, this goes for within the United States and in other countries. The whole landscape of finding property, buying property,
Yeah.
all of that can look very different. Same for taxes and everything going into it.
Getting a bank loan, all that sort of stuff. I'm sure
Yeah,
is
just the
differs
financial
from place to
landscape.
place. But another big one is probably going to be health department regulations. I mean, that varies a lot even here within the one country, the United States, or Canada's, province by province. And that's just going to depend, like, whether your country has kind of a bigger set of uniform regulations for the whole thing, or if it's broken up by chunk, by provinces, or smaller, counties or whatever equivalent is in your kind of area. So that's definitely some landscape that'll need to be figured out. Although for the most part, there's not even like a ton of countries that necessarily have float tank fleshed out rules in many ways, right? Like the US and Canada are figuring things out, and there's some stuff in places like Germany and Austria, and Australia has like some, but once you start getting into places where where float tanks are really just emerging, you're probably not going to like find anything on the books about float tank regulations.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume so. Or you're just going to be having to be the one doing the educating along the way, which is another thing, too, that I've heard from other centers in different countries, which is because a lot of the press coming out around float tanks and their benefits and everything like that is in English, that there's this language barrier where the kind of growing awareness of floating doesn't seem to be spreading as quickly to countries that don't speak English. So another difference, again, depending on the language there might just need to be a lot more education and perhaps even translating some of the other articles that have been done on floating and other resources into your language to make it work.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I guess if you're doing that, you could just, you could take credit for all of it. You'd be like, yeah, I invented these. Like, really just go for it. No one
Not
will know.
legally, unless the laws in your country are different than the laws in the United
They
States,
might
of
be.
course, in
They
which
might
case
be.
you totally can, yeah.
So yeah, health departments, access to construction materials.
Average height of your
Bank
citizens, I
loans.
think, changes.
What the size of tank you're going to want to. When you're buying a float tank, there's things like import fees and shipping and accessibility of getting
Yep.
USB grade salt. All that is going to change like the prices for your initial setup.
Yeah, definitely. And similarly, cultures and different areas are probably going to determine how you set up your center and what kinds of tanks you get and what your marketing pitch is, basically.
Yeah. The marketing's interesting. It's almost there's interesting differences now based on the fact that certain countries like the United States and in Canada have a lot more awareness, like you were saying, about floating, even for consumers, right? So people who are opening float centers now in a city where they're the fifth float center to open up are doing different marketing and outreach than you would be if you're like the first float center in your entire country to be opening up, right? Like you got to play a slightly different game and really focus on education and things like that. So you're going to notice some tangible differences based off of, what the general market is like in your area and whether you're really kind of trying to introduce people to this concept for the first time.
Yeah, for sure. What else? I guess similar to health departments, too, your building department is going to have a whole different process of going through, almost certainly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like ADA codes and all that sort of stuff here that I'm sure can differ widely from place to place.
Yeah, absolutely. So, materials, the actual process of getting permits, who your customers are, what your marketing message is to them, how you talk to health departments. Those are a lot of the things I would expect to change. Things that I would expect to stay the same, though, is a lot of the essentials, to be honest. A lot of stuff like how you want to do your construction, what you actually want to be building, all the philosophy behind that. All of that's going to stay the same for soundproofing and water damage control and stuff like that, even if materials and access to them changes slightly.
Yeah, and all of your operations. I mean, the work that it goes into running the float center and your day-to-day life and all that sort of stuff is going to be pretty similar.
Yep, and even like the general supplies and costs and ongoing expenses of a float center here in the U.S. or for Float On, I would expect to be very similar for a float center pretty much anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Utilities and things like that can change, but you're gonna roughly, if you're providing earplugs and different materials like that for your clients, they're probably going to be using about the same amounts, and it's not going to cost too much, for example. I'd almost say that there's probably more in common with float centers country to country, and certainly that's what I've seen as well in my own travels going around, than there are huge amounts of differences that go into them.
Seems like the differences are mostly like the hurdles you'll have to jump over to get open in the first place.
Yeah. And again, that average height of your customers.
It's a big one. Yeah.
Cool. So again, do your own research. We don't actually live in a foreign country. We've only opened up a float center here in the United States.
Yep.
But we have visited a lot of different countries and a lot of different float centers, and again, I certainly see more similarities than differences.
Cool. Well, if you guys out there have more questions that you want us to answer, hop over to floatanksolutions.com/podcast.
Thanks, everybody.